Hello and welcome to the Nonprofitpodcast. I'm David Higgins. I'm so glad you're here with us today. We have an exciting conversation that we're going to get to have today, and I am so happy that we were able to get the guests that we have. I remember in my 20s, I was leading my first nonprofit, and we were dealing with inner city gang violence and this type of thing, and it was really intense. And it was hard to look up and look long distance, look at the next generation. And yet that mentality is crippling. And I can tell you after many years, it took me a decade to actually learn that part of my mission is the next generation of my mission. And to be able to, as a leader, be able to see that. And that's what today's conversation is about. That is why it's so important. Anyway, before we get into that conversation, this particular podcast is brought to us by Demystifying Fundraising Funnels. It is a blueprint that is going to help you fund your nonprofit using digital marketing tools. It is a book that was written especially for the small and mid-sized nonprofits, saying, David, we are needing to shift, and we don't understand the language or the tools available for us to be able to start communicating, fundraising, connecting to our community using online resources. And so this is allowing you, in the language of nonprofits, be able to build the first several tiers of your online communication and fundraising. So get that book today. It's available wherever books are sold, including Target, Amazon, Audible, and wherever else you just might look. And enjoy that book. If you get a chance to read through it and have questions, feel free to email us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the book. Well, our guest today has a degree in behavioral economics from Harvard Business School. He is a Rotary board member, the chair of the Iowa Commission on Volunteer Services, and more importantly, he is a global board member at the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Let's welcome Cherin Koshy to Nonprofitpodcast. Cherin, it is so good to have you as a part of our podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Man, you are running 100 miles an hour. The fact that you just pause from all the things that are going on out there and spend this time with us, thank you.
It's really my pleasure. I love being here. I love talking to nonprofit folks all the time. And so it really is an honor and a pleasure.
You're going to be speaking just this next month at the Nonprofit Marketing Summit Momentum. It must be exciting to be able to speak at an event with such a global impact.
Yeah, I just saw, I think yesterday, that they have 10,000 people registered. So if you're listening to this and you still have an opportunity to register, I just encourage you. There are tons of great speakers, lots of people that I am excited to learn from. So it's stretching a little bit of a different muscle for me because it's more on the marketing side than on just truly on the fundraising or even investment side. So it'll be a fun experience for sure.
Yeah, I was talking to my team and I was saying, man, I want to get there and I want to be able to be there. I'd like to introduce my book at that as well, but one step at a time, and maybe next year that will be an opportunity for us. But I'm so excited you're going to be there. And I know that we can join virtually, and I think that's what we're going to have to do this year.
Absolutely.
So I got a question. So I mentioned a couple of nonprofit boards that you're serving on. How many is it really that you actually are serving on today?
So I am on 8 boards or commissions right now. Currently, I just stepped off of one. As you can tell, I have a problem saying no, particularly when friends ask. I don't include a committee. They asked me to be on a nominating governance committee, and I said, I'm happy to be on the committee, but I can't be considered for a board spot. So actually yesterday, again, if you're listening to this later, this isn't really relevant, but yesterday I chaired 2 board commission meetings, one in the beginning of the day, one at the end of the day. So it was a long board service day.
My goodness. I had a season in my life where I couldn't say no to board opportunities. And at one point I was running our nonprofit as well as being on 6 different boards. And it was exhausting. I couldn't imagine 8. That's a lot of pull. Yeah.
Well, if you have any advice, let me know. I'm dedicated to each of the causes that I'm with. I just termed off as chair of one. I'll still be on that commission for another year. But as some of these sort of the lifespan terms off, then I'll find other ways to be involved, potentially not in a board role, but they're really important. I mean, you highlighted some of them that are really important to me, like the AFP board, that Commission on Volunteer Service, which is really helpful to me. I've always thought about board service from the lens of a fundraiser. So I really wanted to understand how boards make decisions and how I can be helpful to the board that I'm working in or with. And so I've really found that to be helpful in sitting at the other side of the table, understanding how are grants distributed, how do board meetings work, and so I honestly would encourage, maybe not to the same degree as or me with 6 or 8 boards, but every person working in a nonprofit should also seek to serve on a board, if just for professional development reasons, to understand kind of the process that people go through.
Absolutely. Talk about professional development. During that season, I was sitting on so many boards. I said to my wife, Michelle, and like, after a while, you're dealing with the same questions, dealing
Yeah.
with some of the same issues. And I says, I'm getting a little bored being on boards. And she goes, well, why don't you try the next year to be on every single level of the board? And I took the 6 and I stepped my toe. And one I was a treasurer, another one I was a secretary, another one I was just a trustee, vice president, and then president of my own board. So, by the time we're done with a year, I had some variety coming in. It wasn't as boring, but I backed off in my 40s. I was able to get down to just 4 boards, and that was nice.
Nice. That's what I aspire to do at some point.
What do you consider to be foundation principles needed to have a well-structured board?
So I appreciate that question, because I think a lot of nonprofits ask that question. They struggle with finding kind of what's the right approach to forming a board or building a board or expanding a board. And the reality is that there's no, and we'll come back to this several times, I'm sure, as we talk through this, through different aspects, but there's really no one size fits all approach to boards and board dynamics. One of the challenges with the current thinking around a board matrix is you want someone in specific different fields, right? You want someone in law, you want someone in fundraising, you want someone in facilities or operations. And the challenge is that doesn't take into account a whole host of other factors. Let's bracket for a moment the important element of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and think about how, if you have visionary leaders that are all coming to the same table, and you are a nonprofit that requires an operational board, those pieces are not going to work well together. So from my vantage point, a good board makeup starts with the type of nonprofit you are and the type of board that you have. So Les McEwen wrote a book called Predictable Success. In that, he talks about the life cycle of organizations. I teach this all the time when I work with clients and do webinars on it. But what I love about it, and why I teach Les's system, is because it fits pro forma against every nonprofit I've ever worked in. And there is this life cycle that then impacts what is the right type of board. Some organizations, particularly often small, mid-sized nonprofits, need a more operational board where they're actually out doing the fundraising, for example. Whereas once you get into a not necessarily larger organization, but a more seasoned one, a more complex one, you have staff that are doing the fundraising, and we don't want the board members off doing whatever they want with regard to fundraising. We've got to make sure that those efforts are coordinated, if that makes sense. So it really is about adapting those pieces together. And I've told Kevin Foyle, the current chair of the AFP, that I'm the chair of other boards. I'm just a board member at AFP, but it is my favorite board to be on, because Kevin and the staff there do such a great job when it comes to board engagement, really making sure that from the board meeting perspective, the agendas are well done, the meetings are actually fruitful, you don't get bored in the meetings, you're not kind of phoning it in. even when we are on the phone or on Zoom, we're engaged, we're asked to participate, and it's a meaningful discussion. I think there are times on any board where if you're a governance board, you slip into operations or management a little too much, and we need to keep that top of mind if we're a governance board. But it's really important to kind of match roles and responsibilities of board members to the needs of the organization, and make sure that people are being held accountable to do the work that they're supposed to do. That it's not just a vanity position or whatever. I have no interest in being on a board to be on a board, to be listed on a website somewhere, or I don't need any more meetings in my life. I'm sure you get that as well, right? So it's, how can I add value? How can I make a meaningful contribution to this board? And I think a lot of other board members feel the same way.
One of the, I think, most effective and healthy boards I ever observed. Now, it had to do also with the type of institution it was and their mission. But my son, who lives in San Diego, he attends a church. It's got about 2,000 members. Mm-hmm. They are 80% under the age of 45. So wow. It's a younger congregation. And their pastor, when we went down to visit, he asked if he could sit down with me, and we got a chance just to, go out for a meal, my wife and I, and he and his wife. And I asked him about, their board setup, because my son had dropped something in my ear. And he said that once a year, their congregation votes for almost every single board position. But that board position, you serve the first year, and then you mentor the next person in line the second year, and then you can't run again for 5 more years. But what it does is it transitions. Now, they are a community-based organization, right, as a nonprofit. It brings in, sometimes they have college students on their board, right? Sure. Sometimes they have the most inexperienced people on their board, but they are a great representation of who the congregation trusts and says, sure, this person really is who we think is a healthy person to represent us and make decisions for the direction that the church is going in. Mm-hmm. As a result, he said that he has had such a stickability of the younger people, because they feel like they have a voice in the process, sure, and they do, because they'll bring initiatives, they get voted on by the group, and things move forward. Mm-hmm. And I really like that, because I did not have experience in my younger years of always seeing really the seniors within the organizations calling all the shots. And there was no sense of voice, just responsibility. Absolutely. And yet I saw in this organization quite the opposite, in fact. And I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Have you had a chance to hear more about how that process works and how that mentorship element is designed? Because I think that'd be really helpful for a lot of.
The first thing it does is it creates multiple generations of friends. Because sometimes you'll have a woman who served for a year, 45-year-old woman, and the next person that comes in is some skateboarder from the college that has had this great relationship and helped out and served, and the people in that part of the congregation trust them, said, yeah, we want you, you're giving you our votes to go represent us on the board. And now they're mentoring each other. And it creates this multi-generational depth and relationship, because they become friends. There's this engagement. And also it takes away a lot of the sense of rights. We really feel as a society here in America, I have this, right to be heard, but now it takes away from, we are being heard. And we have a way of accessing decision-making for everyone in the organization.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like there's a cultural dynamic there that definitely infuses among those generational, the older folks. Not that 45 is old, but those people that are older than the skateboarder are really respectful and empowering of those younger generations. Whereas a lot of nonprofits that I see, they'll have someone there, but it's sort of tokenism, whether that's a generational piece or another element of diversity, right? So that's really great to hear.
Yep. The interesting thing is the senior pastor is in his mid-50s. His right-hand man is older than him. So you end up with, usually you attract people, no matter what nonprofit you are in, people that come and volunteer and really draw to you are either 10 years younger or 10 years older than you. But the way they've approached this has allowed them to continually bring in a part of the community that usually doesn't attend church on a regular basis, especially not committed.
Mhm.
And I just like 2 thumbs up. It's really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, that's a great model for any, or I mean, certainly for churches because it's just wise
Mhm.
counsel, but for other nonprofits to kind of figure out how to crack that nut and build that that cultural model and then that mentorship model.
Yeah.
That's really
One of the
helpful.
most important impacts you make is consulting as an investment advisor to nonprofits. What specifically drew you into that focus?
So, just like many of us that fell backwards into fundraising, I sort of fell backwards into the investment space. I have been curious and interested and done reading and research in that space for a while. But it's always something that's sort of been in the background. Um, and as part of board service, I've sat on finance committees and as board treasurer and audit committees and whatnot. So I've had sort of this inside look at how nonprofits deal with financial sustainability. And throughout all of that, I actually, as the finance treasurer of our church, we had some extra money that we had put into CDs, and those CDs started to mature, and we're looking, in this market, it was really impossible to get any kind of yield out of CDs. So we knew that inflation was going to be an issue. What do we do? A friend of a friend introduced me to Endowment Partners, and I was immediately impressed by the way in which they thought about nonprofit financial planning. That it wasn't like how you and I would talk about retirement planning. Um, and because of that, we decided to invest a small amount with them that we had available, and we've continued to grow that. And it's really kind of deepened my interest in the nonprofit financial area, and that's when we got to the discussion of becoming a partner of the firm and building out the business model in the kind of way that we have.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've been at this for over 25 years, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a while.
You know, as a direct experience with nonprofits' fiscal battles, you've become one of the most sought after trainers and speakers in the nonprofit sector, this particular sector. What are some of the greatest battles you find when it comes to nonprofit implementing a strong investment strategy?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of I've done several kind of webinars or trainings on some of these things, and I think one of the biggest challenges is that when we become fundraisers, when we work in nonprofits, we're really skilled in particular areas, right? But a nonprofit executive director isn't necessarily called to be a fundraiser. They may not have that gifting, that skill, and so we try to encourage them to do some of those pieces, but they may not have all of the pieces necessary. The same is true in financial matters. We may not be skilled in those areas. So a lot of times what I see is whether it's the staff or the board, there are a lot of myths around investing. First and foremost, we can't. We are a nonprofit, so we should not make a profit. And I've heard this from people on my team, on the fundraising team. Well, we can't make a profit. I'm like, well, we're not raising money to benefit ourselves. So we don't get extra money because we've done a great job that we put in our bank account or fly to Tahiti because of the work that we've done. But there's nothing in a nonprofit structure that prevents us from raising money or using less money than we've been gifted by the community in order to sustain ourselves in the future. There's nothing that requires a nonprofit to live paycheck to paycheck, and they shouldn't, because it jeopardizes everything that the organization holds dear. It jeopardizes the mission, it jeopardizes the beneficiaries, and it undermines the success of the employees, right? The nonprofit staff, because now they don't have the resources that they need to be able to deliver on the mission, to be able to fundraise well. So those are really kind of the myths that permeate the top level. Then when it comes to investing, it's really about, I need $1 million to invest. No, you don't. You can start with $1,000. You can start with, you know, just figuring out how to modify your budget just a little bit to save more than you spend, right? So there are easy ways of sort of addressing that. I think that, you mentioned behavioral economics. I took this course at through Harvard Extension, which was really eye opening to me. I love the concept of behavioral economics, and one of the key factors that someone won the Nobel Prize for is this idea of loss aversion, and this is true in financial matters no matter what. We're worried about losing money, and so we retreat from doing that. Loss aversion is actually a more powerful motivator than the gains, and so that's one of the key factors for nonprofits. They don't want to lose money. And one of the things I shared in an online forum, this person was saying, well, you should not invest money. You should put your money in a savings account. Well, one of the things that we learned in 2021 was that inflation was 7%. So you put $100,000 into a savings account at the beginning of 2021. At the end of 2021, you have $93,000 in spending power. That's jeopardizing to the mission, right? So we're not able to pay, and everybody's salary is impacted by that, right? We can't pay people their cost of living adjustment. They have to pay more for the Domino's pizza or for gas or whatever the circumstance is, but we can't pay them more because we don't have those resources. So I think it comes down to, if I were to boil it down, it really comes down to the nonprofit scarcity mindset, that we think about scarcity, not abundance. And that's really the shift that we need to make at the board level and at the staff level to really be able to deliver on mission impact.
I was raised in a culture of founding nonprofits.
Mm,
And within that culture, I'm about second generation. I saw my father travel the world, opening up nonprofits, faith-based nonprofits that are orphanages and schools and this
mhm,
type of thing. And yet the scarcity mindset was something that permeated the organization as well. They lived and raised funds just for the next step, because there are so many getting founded all the time. It was like we never had any access at all.
sure.
And it built a real wall of not being able to understand this conversation in those early years. And so often, as I've matured, I've wished I could have taken what I've learned back, 15 years, and say, if I could have known this, like if I would have met you when I was 32, you and I would have had some fun together. you know.
Absolutely.
But I got a feeling that when I was 32, you were still in university, though. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's good there's good counsel with regard to that. I'm on the board of a missions organization. I talk about this with a lot of faith-based organizations. They feel like they've taken a vow of poverty when they do missions work, ministry work, faith-based work, and the reality is that you know a lot of faith traditions talk about stewardship. They talk about long-term planning. There's a parable of talents, right? That inform us about what does it look like to plan for the future. And I come back to, if you're a faith-based organization or not, if the mission is important to you, then making sure that you can deliver on that mission longer term is important. Now, some people will say, well, we want to work ourselves out of a job and we don't want to have to, do this work. And I love that idea. I love that enthusiasm. But the reality is that for some causes, like hunger or homelessness, there will always be people who suffer from hunger or homelessness. Our goal is to minimize their time affected by that and to be able to have sort of immediate responses. So we're still going to need help there. And things like art is a really good example of where we're never done. And I think art is, art, music, those types of things are so important to our communities, but we can't ever say, well, we've solved that problem. That doesn't exist in in the world of art or music or something like that, right? We always need new creative energy in our lives. So I think it's really just a function of shifting that mindset and really rethinking, if you will, how you approach funding that mission in the future.
your nonprofit financial strategies I got a chance in my research to start looking at some of the stuff that's been published that you've written. Advancing Philanthropy, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Great Britain's Institute of Fundraising. I mean, it's been published at a high level. And can you just take 5 minutes and give us an overview of a healthy nonprofit's philosophy concerning investment?
Sure. I'm happy to take a couple of minutes. I don't know that anybody wants to hear 5 minutes on
Take
this.
two, take
but-
one.
Yeah,
I'm just saying the floor is yours.
Well, I appreciate that. I will say, coming back to one of the things I mentioned before, there really truly is no one size fits all approach, and I think one of the myths that sort of permeate is, well, we're just stuck in this automatic portfolio of how to invest and what to invest in, and I think really finding a firm that respects the unique DNA of your organization. What are the things that you are comfortable investing in? What are the things that you're not comfortable in investing in? Those ESG, environmental sustainability and governance issues, are really important to kind of think through and have a portfolio or investment strategy that respects your mission and your vision. So with that in mind, not having one size fits all, the to kind of borrow from your book idea, I think there's sort of a funnel when it comes to, if you wanted a general approach. What I like to say, and this is what we did with our church, and a lot of small nonprofits fit into this model of, you need to build up cash reserves. And as finance chair, as the treasurer of the church, the thing that we did was budget in a way that we weren't looking to raise more money, because I'm a fundraiser by trade. So I don't want to put the onus on how do we raise more money, because there need to be resources in order to do that. So how can we intentionally build a budget that has some float to it? And what I was looking at as a budget person was, can I get 10% out of this? Our budget's $100,000. Can I figure out how to spend 90? So we have $10,000 sitting extra. If we don't, we don't, but let's aim for that, right? And then we build up this cash reserve. And my kind of rule, and when I think of this, is about 3 to 6 months of cash reserves for the organization. So if something happens and donations don't come in, your sponsor, your event has to go virtual or doesn't exist at all in the time of COVID, you can't do that. What are our options to be able to continue to pay the staff, continue to deliver on our programs? 3 to 6 months of cash reserve. So then the next piece of that funnel, after you have that 3 to 6 months of cash reserve, is then to say, what does a reserve account look like? This is money that you don't need for 90 days, but is money that you can invest in conservatively, that would pay for some expenses that might come up. If you have a facility, you might have HVAC repairs, you might have, insurance deductible, these types of things that you might want to save for, kind of that rainy day fund. And then you set a threshold for that reserve account to say, okay, maybe we want a year's worth, that next $100,000 in that reserve account, for example. And then after that, now we're looking at long-term funds. What are the funds that we don't need for 3 to 5 years or more that we can invest in a still conservative, right? There's state laws that apply to nonprofit pieces, and basically everyone's going to invest in generally the same things. You're never going to have a nonprofit that invests solely in Bitcoin, for example, or something like that. But you're going to have a balanced portfolio. And so then the idea is, how can you do something with those longer term funds that is smart, that allows you to draw, have a spending policy that draws some money that helps you fund cool things or advance the mission, expand the scale of the organization in some way, and protect the organization, of course, in the case of something catastrophic like a pandemic. What I love about some of the things that our investment team does is that, as I mentioned before, what I was attracted to was the idea that what we don't do in our retirement accounts is like day trade or actively manage, right? It's, everybody sort of says, put your money in and set it and forget it. Look at it when you're ready to retire. And there's some rebalancing that goes on, but basically you let it go. The reason why that's the case for you and me, David, is because we have tax implications, right? We don't want to move money from place to place because we'd have to pay short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains on top of other tax elements, but nonprofits don't have that. So our team is really smart about knowing that nonprofits don't have those tax implications. Now, they're not day trading, they're not doing anything irresponsible or anything like that, but they're doing wise strategy that can advantage nonprofits, and I think that's really cool.
You mentioned cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Um, just 2 weeks ago, I was consulting with a nonprofit, beautiful nonprofit, completely volunteer led, dealing with an environmental issue that is needed. They are really at a point where, if they don't get their message out, the the environment in that area is going to hit a point of no return.
Mm,
So they're trying to turn something that's going to be that's very important. So we were giving them marketing consulting.
sure.
How to get the word out, how to draw on the next generation of donors. And we had these meetings all on Zoom. Then I got a call and they said, "Well, we're deciding not to move that direction." And that afternoon, they had a board meeting, and a young man came in who was a cryptocurrency trader and took the entire marketing budget and invested in cryptocurrency. And I was
Wow.
just like, "Oh, that's they're and they had their reasons. Obviously, this young man created a very good argument that they believed, but I was surprised. I know people have done well with cryptocurrency. I know
Yeah,
people that lost their shirt on it.
sure.
Just because they were in it at the wrong time, and suddenly they lost 100 billion in the market in that area.
Yeah.
So it was one of the things for those that are listening. Take cryptocurrency with a grain of salt. There's some value to be had if you really know what you're doing, but you can lose a lot. As a nonprofit, those are funds I really don't recommend you gambling with.
Yeah, the volatility is certainly one piece of that. I also think if your listeners are interested in researching this, I think it's fine to accept cryptocurrency as a gift, right? If people want to give cryptocurrency, there are great resources to be able to do that, and that's fine. I mean, we're certainly of the opinion that every nonprofit should be able to accept gifts of assets. Russell James has great research on gifts of assets driving larger fundraising efforts. So if you're not able to accept gifts of stock, find a firm that will be able to do that for you. Our firm does that for free. We'd love to be able to enable you to do that. When it comes to cryptocurrency, there are fees involved, and that's the thing that I would encourage you to kind of investigate is when it comes to crypto, most of the crypto assets are actually held by very few people. And the same is true with NFTs. So, there's this whole trend analysis around crypto's the new future and blah, blah, blah. I think there's an element of that, but you're focusing on a very small group of people within a very small group of people, right? Those people, as you mentioned, that have succeeded in the crypto space and are charitable by their nature. So it's really like
Absolutely.
your grain of salt advice, I think, is really worth highlighting there.
Yeah. About just over 80% of all nonprofits in America have less than 15 to 25 employees.
Hmm.
And out of that group, the majority of those are the ones that are really the boots on the ground. They are the homeless shelters. They are the food banks. They are the drug rehabilitation,
Hmm.
the youth support type systems. And the ones that we can't do without, but they are usually very short on resources, right?
Hmm.
They're in a moment by moment mentality because they've got to rescue, they've got to fix, they've got to constantly meet a need that's actually bigger than their organization. And what does a nonprofit need to consider as they begin the process of changing from a reactive moment by moment mentality into a deliberate future thinking vision like we're talking about today?
Yeah, if I had the answer to that, brother, I would be a millionaire, best New York Times bestseller. And I don't. I mean, certainly not a short, pithy answer to that. I think the closest I can get to short and pithy is John Acuff was an author, tweeted a while back, and he said and he was talking about businesses, and he said at a certain point, if you are an entrepreneur and you are great at your product, but you're bad at your business, sooner or later you don't get to do your product anymore, or your service anymore. And I think that is 10 times as true for a nonprofit, where if you are not thinking about the long term or the sustainable elements of the really the boots on the ground, as you mentioned, the most important work for our society, whether it's homelessness or hunger or some of these essential services, at a certain point you're not going to be able to serve those people. And what I see in a lot of organizations that I work with is this whack-a-mole approach, right? Like, and it's good-hearted. It is coming from the right place of, how do I solve these problems, and whatever problem comes my way, I'm going to find a way to solve that. But what I guess, if I were to kind of pin it down, I would say less is more. My high school teacher kept drilling that into my head when I was a kid, and said, you need to focus on fewer things. And Greg McEwen writes this really good book called Essentialism, that is really talks about this concept. If you want to do something meaningful, you've got to identify what is the way in which you can serve people best, and then partner with other organizations to get some of those other pieces done. So you don't need to be everything to everyone, but you need to figure out, how are the ways in which you can leverage what you have as um, an opportunity to be able to have a significant impact on the community that you serve, and then ultimately find ways to build into those systems a sustainable infrastructure. And it really is focusing on how important is that mission longer term, right? And what does it mean if we're, and reframing that loss aversion to say, what does it look like if we're not here next year, right? Or 5 years from now. And so if we don't invest in X, Y, and Z, this depends on the organization. But if we don't invest in fundraising systems, if we don't invest in our technology, if we don't invest in our people, which is probably like the biggest issue. You say 80% of nonprofits have 15 or fewer staff members. Many of those are also the ones with little or nothing in the bank with regard to savings. We can't invest in people. Now we make it makes it even more difficult for us to deliver on the mission. It's more weight, more of a burden on the people who are doing the work. And it becomes harder and harder to volunteer in those places, because so much is placed on fewer people. And even the best cultures and systems can't kind of break out of that starvation cycle.
This is some good stuff. Thank you. This is some good stuff.
Hard,
I'm going to ask you a question. It's a little redundant to some of the stuff we've covered before, but I want us to recapsulize this thought. What are the key thought principles that go into well thought out investment strategy for a nonprofit?
So I think it starts with the board and their governance. Governance documents. This is really an important piece to make sure that you're thinking through the structures and approaches to kind of any investment piece. I think the next piece is really the actual investments themselves. We talk to a lot of nonprofits who are investing in tax advantage accounts, which doesn't make sense for a nonprofit, right? You don't get a tax advantage. You're not benefiting from that. In any way. So what does it look like to be smart about those pieces? And then the last piece is really holistic. What I love about what we do is it's not just managing the assets of what's already there. It's about helping the nonprofit grow the assets that can go into those investment accounts. And that's where my team comes in, is to say, these are opportunities. So we work with a lot of nonprofits, but we also work with consultants, because I have so many friends who are consultants that they can't do the investment management piece. They can do the consulting piece, which we love. And so we take care of the investment piece. If they're doing, for example, a campaign of some sort, like a capital campaign or whatever, if it's a 3-year campaign and you're not going to break ground for several years, you can put some of those early assets into an investment account, get some return on that prior to you breaking ground, or have an endowment component, or a long-term reserve fund, and those pieces. So I think it really just comes down to smart, thoughtful planning, taking a step back and saying, okay, we've got a lot going on here. What are the things that are most important? How do we think about this? from a long-term perspective, and that requires overcoming bias. We've got a short-term bias. All of us do. We like the now, and we don't want to think about what's later. So we have to kind of force ourselves. And one of the pieces I wrote, I talked about having this sort of a person at the table in those discussions who is responsible for only looking at the long term, right? To saying, have we thought about how do we approach what does this look like 5 years from now or 50 years from now? And that sort of forces the conversation to go that direction.
That's brilliant. Having somebody at the table that their only responsibility is looking at the long term.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's right there a nugget of gold. I think that's going to be an outtake right there. Dang.
I love it.
We did talk about a couple of these things. The red flags that are in. When you're consulting with organizations and you see that they're not really ready to move forward. Some of those biggest hindrances are what you're talking about, the short-term bias. You just brought that up. Other hindrances that, organizations may be listening and they're going, oh, wait a minute, we need to overcome that so that we can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some common ones for sure, but from our perspective, and anytime I'm working with any kind of nonprofit or speaking to groups of fundraisers or whatnot, sometimes there's a bridge too far, right? And there are people who are, very laser focused in what they're doing. And my encouragement is try to take one very small step in the direction that would create change, right? In change management theory, we're not trying to get from A to Z, we're trying to get from A to B, right? And so if you're listening to this and you're saying, I don't know how we could get to that, let's try and, alter that budget. We're probably around budget time for a lot of organizations. Let's try to alter that budget so that we're not butting up against expenses and revenues, right? We can push those expenses down a little bit. Let's not do as much and make some difficult choices. I wouldn't sacrifice on staffing, but maybe there's some other ways to trim back on expenses so we have a little bit of float. That's just the simple thing, right? A lot of times with board and staff, it's this reticence to spend any money, and that's not just from an investment like financial portfolio model. It's just, do we even invest in a website? Do we invest in staffing? Do we invest in resources for fundraising? And those are really red flags for me because it indicates that the organization is not ready to take some of these other steps. They really need to focus on where they are right now and how to get to that point. And that's why it comes back to this idea of what's the life cycle of the organization. So this every life cycle, as Les talks about, and there's a quiz on my website we can add in the show notes so you can find out where you are. But like an early struggle, if you're a small nonprofit, you're just trying to make it by, then you're not ready for some of these other structures. You've got to get through early struggle. You've got to move through that into what Les calls fun. And once you get to fun, there are new red flags, and then you can get into whitewater and all of those other things. But there are particular red flags for each of those stages. And you can go further into treadmill or the big rut. And lots of organizations get into this side of the red flags where they're over processed and they're hampering innovation and growth in their organization life cycle. So it's not just the small new ones, it's even larger older ones that have their own red flags.
Wow. This has been a fascinating conversation. What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you, learn more, read more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, I try to be out there and I have a pretty unique name. So it was easy to get a website. It's just myname.com, CHERIAN KOSHY.com. And our firm is endowmentpartners.com. So we cross-post things as much as possible so you can kind of identify what are the things that you're looking for. As you mentioned, I do workshops and webinars as well that are publicly out there. So those are opportunities as well.
Fantastic. Well, we end every nonprofit podcast doing a shout out to nonprofits that we People are doing a great job. So I know you and I made a note about this. If you're able to find one,
Yeah, absolutely.
all right. So I'll go first.
Yeah.
Then it'll be your turn.
All right.
So mine starts with a little bit of a story. So I was born in Palmerston North, New Zealand.
Okay.
And while I was there getting in those 4 months that was in the process of being birthed, before we left there, my dad met a captain, a ship captain, and he was instrumental in helping this guy revitalize his life. He ended up becoming a captain with the Mercy ships with YWAM. And when I was 18 years old, graduated from high school, I got the opportunity to become a carpenter on the Mercy ships and doing music and traveling with the Mercy ships. Unfortunately, just as that happened, I was called to a world tour with music and ended up never getting on the boat. And it was one of those woulda, coulda, shoulda, wanted to, didn't do it.
Yeah.
But that was an organization called YWAM. Well, there's another couple that was in YWAM, and they were doing work over in Africa. And they actually started seeing the lack of fresh water. And they stepped away from their obligations with YWAM and started Charity Water. And I want to give a huge shout out to what I think is one of the most effective nonprofits worldwide. It's international nonprofit, and it's called Charity Water. Now, in the book, Demystifying Fundraising Funnels, I actually bring them up in their story in that book, but they have been able to go far beyond their mission. And instead of just trying to affect fresh water in Africa, now they are global in their attack to it. And I just want to encourage you as nonprofit leaders and nonprofit directors, you're saying, okay, we want to see how a nonprofit can attach themselves to digital marketing and social marketing techniques. Charity Water has been very open with their success of where their income has come from and how their resources are gathered to them. And they have raised over $500 million using social media, digital marketing techniques to supplement their fundraising. And it has been a shock to them. But the fact is, there's not that many nonprofits that are really articulating their argument online. And they have done it, and they've done it well. So I would like to give them a shout out to you as a listener, saying, look at the way they're doing things and realize that they're not just a great organization that's accomplishing their mission. They have some amazing, fantastic people that are leading their charge. And so check them out at charitywater.org. All right, Cherian, it is your turn. Who would you like to give a shout out to?
That's such a great example. I have had the opportunity to hear Scott speak, and he is so motivating, and I love their storytelling in particular. So that's a great example. So if it's okay with you, David, I'd love to have two nonprofits.
We're breaking the rules.
I know, and it's really hard for me because I'm on 8 boards. So I want
to disclose, kick 6 of them out of your list.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm not going to pick 2 from my list. I'm going to pick 1 from my list. And as I mentioned before, if you are in the nonprofit fundraising space and you're not a member of AFP, I would encourage you to go out to afpglobal.org, see what membership looks like, but also to support the foundation, because I think it does incredible work in making the profession more accessible and making people feel confident and capable of delivering on the mission for so many organizations. So I feel like AFP is a systemic opportunity for the nonprofit space. And that's why I'm a part of it and why I love donating to the foundation myself. But I didn't want to just use one that I'm super biased for. A few weeks ago, I did a webinar and I did a stewardship challenge. I encouraged nonprofits to reach out to their donors and thank them. I made a gift to an organization as part of that challenge that's called Life Moves. And it is the largest and one of the most effective nonprofits ending the cycle of homelessness for families in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. I really was impressed with, I donated to them because of the challenge, but I got to know their program. And what is so meaningful about their work, they combat homelessness today and tomorrow by teaching comprehensive life skills that help their clients achieve long-term self-sufficiency. And I just think their model is so great from the perspective of not just addressing homelessness in the short term, but also really figuring out what does self-sufficiency look like and ending intergenerational poverty. They have 12,000 volunteers, and that means that they're able to serve more than 9,000 homeless clients and provide almost 250 nights of shelter annually. So it's a great program. I would check out their website, and if you feel called to do so, make a gift just like I did.
Do you know what their URL is?
It is, let me see here. I probably should have checked that out. It's lifemoves.org.
Lifemoves.org. Fantastic. Thank you, Cherian, for being a part of this podcast. We really have enjoyed you as a guest.
Truly my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And to all of you that are out there with your just boots on the ground and doing the day-to-day work, we appreciate you. You're doing an amazing job. Look, if business could do it, they would have found a way to make money doing it. If government could have done it, they would have passed laws to do what you're doing. But no one could figure out a solution. So you are an experiment trying to help society do what others with money couldn't do. And we need you. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and keep doing it. We're here cheering you on, giving you high fives. Until we speak again in a few days, have a great week. Bye now.